Each year, we honor traditions that connect us with our historical roots. Traditions are known to endure the tests of times, but there are 15 American traditions that could not. Let's take a look at them. One new thing that technology brings with it is the ability to view what you want when you want. But this was not the case with appointment television. Appointment television was the main source of consuming entertainment back in the day. People would save their personal hours at work, swap their shifts, or tell their kids, "Not now," all just to make time for their favorite and scheduled television program. In the 1960s, television channels had specific time slots that they would set shows in. A lot of the most popular television series like The Addams Family would occupy afternoon slots like 4 or 5 p.m. Kids also would have their own separate reigns on TV sets in households depending on the TV slot, changes Scooby-Dooby-Doo was prone to. Today you can just Google, Netflix, or YouTube whatever you would like, if not outright pirate it, so appointment television got really redundant. Still, there really was some charm to reserving a whole part of your day for a TV program. It gave it another kind of importance which we do not assign to shows now, because they are just something we can whip out anytime and pause at any time. What if you missed an important episode back then? You would be stuck with no way to see it and risk spoilers. Station wagons were a very vintage method of transportation that was built around 1910, but peaked much later towards the end of the 90s. In about 1976, they saw their highest sales ever as around 900,000 units sold each year. They made up about 10% of all vehicle sales in all of the United States of America. Plus, there was an incredible amount of customer choice back then due to the high demand. You had around 60 models on the market to choose from, so most households you would visit would have one parked. Station wagons were incredibly convenient for activities like going to the drive-in or spending a night out on the town with your friends. Spending dinner with your family or taking your children to the amusement park you finally promised them to. Anything and everything we do with a car, people back then usually did with these wagons. Now, the upper class still had their fancy cars and other vehicles, but this was a common ride for the common man. You may have, if you grew up in the 80s or the 90s, heard of the milkman. That was this unknown entity, known only for his association to milk and being known for having it. You see, our dear friend, the job of the milkman was milk deliveries, and that was a job our calcium-oriented friend took very seriously. In the same era as wagons, another odd trend that we would never see today since we get everything a person could ever want door-dashed, in the 1960s, around 29% of all people who bought milk had theirs delivered. That is a pretty substantial number. Vanished completely, and it seemed like it would not stay for long. People's suspicions were right when even that number halved in 2005 and people all over simply stopped opting for milk deliveries, though demand did rise during the pandemic. Something like getting your milk delivered being left behind is a societal leap that we can make sense of, but when did going to a theater for a movie's opening night get old? Seriously, all of the genre-defining releases and classics of the 90s and 80s would never get the same sold-out houses they received on their opening weekends. We are talking about classical films of all genres like Ghostbusters 2, Beverly Hills Cop, Rocky, Indiana Jones, and Batman. People used to go out in droves to these kinds of events. Young couples would book first-row tickets, and old couples would borrow back-seat ones, both hoping to make something special out of the night by going to the movies. Yet, today, unless a movie is a viral sensation like Barbenheimer or The Avengers, it seems like it does not get that kind of reception at all. Especially with sequels and franchises where knowing the background of a multi-title movie series and all the lore is important. Just about anyone shows up nowadays, but how did we go from $4.1 billion sold in tickets in 1946 to just barely over $800 million in the 2020s? That is a decline that doesn't make sense even given the almost century that has already passed. The simple truth is, people now can save their money on movies much easier. Feel uneasy about a film? Wait until it is out on the net, watch some of it, see IMDb reviews about it. People do not want to unknowingly waste money on going out to movies they might not enjoy. In the same way as viewing your favorite film in front of your eyes on the big screen is a thing of the past, so are kids selling door-to-door, awakening the entrepreneurial spirit of the neighborhood. Kids would go around saying things like, "My soccer team is selling some soda, do you want some too?" and make their afternoon lunch or save up for that special action in this kind of way. Boy Scout activities also may have included some door-to-door business on the down low. See, not only has what we view and the media we consume become really fast-paced, but so has the real estate market. In today's market, it is hard for a neighborhood to consistently be full of the same people. Even in 2023, over 109 million folks chose to rent their housing instead of purchasing. Big metropolises like New York live by that and die by it too. So how does that relate? Well, when your neighbors paycheck to paycheck and rent to rent, you get less comfortable. People just do not feel so safe letting their kids out for those kinds of activities nowadays and believe that it is a high kidnapping risk. In 1976, the annual tally for cases was around 6,000 TARs, which is frightening. In '84, it skyrocketed to $751,000. It has only kept increasing since, so it makes sense why parents are wary. Community cookbooks disappearing is another example of the sense of unity fading from modern-day America, as people used to have shelves filled with these. Community cookbooks were so common in the early '90s, and people would make them for all kinds of reasons. Sometimes they just felt like piling their recipes together, but sometimes it would be this really big celebration of some event. It could even be to raise money for charity, but most had easy-to-make home recipes that all kinds of families could love. People cherished their community cookbooks, and a lot of the most popular recipes ever came from these, some of the ones that even grandmas today are famous for. It was even a touching sentiment in families to hand the family copy of the community cookbook off to the newlyweds to set them off on their merry way. Again, though, something like that, while it is a great testament to human endeavor and how we are smarter together, it is pretty redundant in today's age. Nowadays, every store you pass takes cash or debit or even online payment apps, but back in the 20th century, carrying cash was very much common. Walk into an Atlanta restaurant and pay with a $100 bill today. You might get pulled out for illegal U.S. tender, but use that same bill in the olden days and you would get your change with a smile. Electronic transactions did not even become too common until the late '90s, and for big purchases especially, people would keep hunks of cash to really seal the deal. Even carrying petty cash around for day-to-day activities was really regular. There were only tens of thousands of ATMs in the mid-1980s in America, and some of these did not even work. Therefore, having $500 out $800 in your wallet seems like hindsight striking early. Of course, people were still at the same risk of being robbed, which is something they can now avoid with e-wallets and transactions. If you are watching this video on your off day from your university semester, then this is especially for you because maybe the both of us have not realized how uncommon calling home weekly from college has become. People really used to save time both personal and on the telephone to call back to their family, especially on the weekends. Back then, it was either catch a plane or catch a flight, so visiting your family after you went to another state for your studies was not too easy. Plus, all people had to keep in touch with each other were calls and letters. When people said, "It has been so long since we saw you," they literally meant it, because folk would often go till the next Christmas to see their kids. In our daily life, we just swipe up on Insta, WhatsApp, or Zoom and start a video quality in 1080p with just a stable internet connection. Maybe that is why we may not be able to appreciate this as much as 80s kids, but think about it. How would you feel not being able to contact your family in any other way but from the telephone booth for moments at a time? It is a pretty unnerving thought, isn't it? Speaking of booths, the phone and calling people, did you ever hear about telephone party line systems? The very first of these came from as far back as 1878, but they really saw some use in the mid-20th century. These were basically telephone circuits that looped locally. They were set up this way so that a lot of people could subscribe to one circuit. Anyone within it could contact each other, so that was definitely one way of keeping up with neighborhood gossip. Ever hear about those communities or apartment complexes that pay for their water together? They tend to get it at a discount since they are buying in bulk, right? Same idea here. These lines were cheaper than your usual phone call and became pretty attractive to people. Think of it like a very primal version of Twitter, since it served the same purpose anyway, spreading the world's news around. Communication has drastically changed, but you have to give them credit. It was a pretty fun idea back then. Did you know those Sunday family dinners we always see in sitcoms like 2.5 Men or Modern Family were a pretty real American trend and cultural staple? For a lot of families, breaking bread together in the name of the Lord on the break of a Sunday dawn was tradition. It was almost like dinners were incomplete if you were having food separate from your family. It helped that back then, work weeks also allowed for the kind of spare time in which you could sit and have big family dinners. Even though the 44-hour work week was reduced to 40 hours in 1940 and has been the law ever since, only 42% of the overall labor force actually works 40-hour weeks. The rest get called in for overtime or shift schedules or emergencies, especially in the service sector. Next time you know why people tell you to talk to your waiters and counter people nicely. It's a harsh world out there, and some of us do not get to spend Sunday with our loved ones. Along with a growing sense of isolation due to today's overstimulating and busy world, people have begun to find that knowing your neighbor is an activity they do not have energy for. People are gradually becoming less and less interested in knowing who lives next to them, and remember how we talked about how much rent culture was growing? Why would you want to know your neighbors if they are young enough to be your kids or old enough to be your parents? Things like that make people think of hopping on social media for their daily dose of society instead of stepping outside and having a conversation with your fellow man. Maybe a lot of the safety risks of today would go down too if we fostered the same kind of importance towards community that there used to be. Since neither your neighbors nor your break times last too long these days, what benefit does continued commitment to one specific thing, place, person, or job get you? Today, lifetime employment just is not something people expect, neither when they are going in interviews nor when they are the ones conducting one. Most of the people that even have lifetime jobs are old workers who make up only around 1/3 of the jobs that currently are in the economy. But it used to be a pretty common dream to stick to a great job at one place, work until retirement, and enjoy your white picket fence down to the last beer. So what changed? The recession first of all led to so many layoffs. And mind you, this is what started the quick hire, quicker fire work culture of today, where you get 2 weeks to get your life together after being terminated. As the US economy struggled to come back, a lot of people became much more hesitant with lifetime job offers and stopped having it as a policy. Maybe we can see that kind of financial security come back sometime in our lives. Along with the privilege of earning your daily bread becoming a tad bit harder over the generations, things like town hall meetings, which were hallmarks of democracy, also kind of faded. Since it is the thing that a lot of the Constitution is largely based on, you would think that political and governmental trends like these would be an ageless thing. But nope. Today's kids get more likes replying to the politicians of their country on Facebook and Twitter than the politicians do making their own social media campaign posts. At least, that is how discontent gets virally expressed. Back then, you had these town hall meetings where people could go up to their government or their electives, directly, face-to-face and one-on-one speak with the people who are making institutional changes with their tax money. That is just a whole different vibe than talking to them through an app. You know, it really matters. It makes news, it makes headlines, and sometimes it even makes history. They did not have to take place in a town hall, but they had to be a platform where the common people could have a real, straight conversation with their government. Hold them accountable, ask why their roads have not been fixed, what is wrong with the plumbing, all that jazz. We would definitely like to see something so power to the people themed come back. You might remember us talking about telephone calls to your folks back at home a while ago to show how that and physical postcards and letters were the only way to get through. People were really big back then on writing handwritten letters or sending detailed postcards for Thanksgiving, Easter, and other holidays. It showed thoughtfulness and that you were thinking about the person, and they were not just a romantic gesture. Sending postcards was also a common practice amongst friends. Having a pen pal was quite common back then, and so it is no surprise this tradition was loved. Before the pandemic hit, around 2.28 billion cards were mailed most years, but in the heyday of letters, that number was easily over 3 billion. You can imagine how many people liked inking away their thoughts that had not found form nor audience for the longest of time. Then you were just a postage stamp and a few cents away from contact. Yes, the wait for a letter back was just as dramatic as it is in the films, in case you were wondering. To end the list with a set of pins and a bowling ball seems very American. But did you know that people used to pay for memberships in bowling teams? Yep, local or national leagues had their own subscription fees that members could pay to take a real part in the team and wreck some pins. Typical subscription fees would look like $20, $50 depending on the league, but they were a great way for the sport to spread. If you happened to have picked up an interest in bowling after you watched a game, or if you wanted to sharpen your skills up for a date, it was very accessible. You would be shocked to learn that there were about 11,500 bowling alleys in the 60s. That is a lot of real estate for one sport, if you ask us. Back in the day, during the golden era of the 50s and 60s, soda fountains stood as the heart of American leisure, buzzing with life and the sweet aroma of syrup, where dreams shone as brightly as the countertops. These were the social theaters of everyday life, where rock and roll tunes set the stage for teenage dreams and family outings. Imagine a lively spot filled with laughter and treats like malted milkshakes and banana splits, all to the tune of a jukebox. Though fast food and changing tastes have overshadowed them, soda fountains, with their sense of community, nostalgia, and joy over simple pleasures like an ice cream soda, remain a cherished memory of simpler times. Deciding what to do with a book of S&H green stamps was a major decision. A new set of dishes? A toy guitar? This was a treasure hunt where the prize could be as grand as a new toaster or as whimsical as a garden gnome, all tucked away in the pages of a stamp book. It was a communal hobby, a shared endeavor that bridged generations, teaching lessons in patience and the joy of saving. Though the digital age has introduced more direct means of rewarding loyalty, the legacy of S&H green stamps endures, a testament to a time when loyalty was measured in stamps and rewards were a tangible slice of the American dream. Anyone remember watching The Pink Panther or the original Parent Trap from their car? Drive-in movies are a nostalgic symbol across all generations these days, but only boomers truly remember the experience in its golden age. Here, families and friends congregated under the starlit sky, their cars turned into private viewing booths where popcorn was passed hand to hand and movies were watched with a sense of freedom that indoor theaters couldn't match. These venues were communal spaces where memories were made, where the first notes of a love story could begin against the backdrop of a Hollywood ending. Though the advent of home entertainment has led to their decline, the romance of drive-in theaters endures, a sweet note of nostalgia in the digital age's symphony. If you remember the 1960s frenzy known as Beatlemania as a first-hand participant, you're definitely a boomer. The Beatles catapulted into global superstardom around 1963, and their then unprecedented fan base is still an icon of the era. It wasn't merely about the music, though the tunes were catchy enough to hum for days. It was about the moment, the feeling, the unbridled joy of being part of something larger than life. The Beatles, with their cheeky smiles and Liverpudlian lilt, were the Pied Pipers of a generation, leading legions of fans through the streets of new sonic landscapes. Their concerts were cathedrals of sound, where the air vibrated with the screams of fans and the promise of youth. Beatlemania changed the world, leaving a legacy of innovation and freedom that still echoes today. There was a time when television whispered goodnight with the strains of the national anthem, a patriotic lullaby that marked the end of the broadcast day. This tradition, steeped in a sense of national pride, was a daily ritual that united viewers, a shared moment of reflection in the glow of the TV screen. It was a reminder of shared values and common dreams, a closing note that spoke of unity and belonging in a vast and varied nation. As 24-hour programming dawned and the anthem faded from the airwaves, the memory of this tradition lingers, a symbol of a time when television was not just entertainment, but a communal hearth, where the nation could gather and be reminded of its shared identity and values. Even if boomers were too young to remember President Lyndon B. Johnson signing the act, which outlaws discrimination, they've probably experienced the effects of the changes in policy it brought about, like the integration of schools. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 stands as a towering milestone in the journey toward equality in America, a beacon of hope that illuminated the path forward. It was a declaration, loud and clear, that discrimination would no longer be tolerated under the law. This act was a victory, hard-won by the sweat and tears of countless individuals who dared to dream of a world where everyone had a seat at the table. Its passage was not just a political triumph, but a cultural shift, signaling the beginning of the end for the entrenched barriers of racism and segregation. While the journey towards equality continues, the Civil Rights Act remains a cornerstone. If you wanted to call a friend or a business, you had to flip through the phone book to find their number. Were you listed in the white pages? It was a catalog of lives, businesses, and services, a physical manifestation of the network that connected us all. Flipping through its pages was a tactile journey, a reminder of the interconnectedness that binds us. The decline of the phone book, hastened by the rise of the internet, marks the end of an era of tangible connections. Yet for those who remember its heft and scope, the phone book remains a symbol of a time when the world was at your fingertips, just a page turn away. In the heyday of analog photography, flash cubes stood as tiny beacons of innovation, illuminating the faces of the 60s and 70s with a burst of light and a click. These cubic wonders, with their single-use flashbulbs, transformed the average Joe into a moment-capturing maestro, banishing shadows and brightening smiles in living rooms and birthday parties alike. Flash cubes symbolize the democratization of photography, a step towards capturing life's fleeting moments without the need for a photography degree. Though their glory days were numbered, with technology marching on to sleeker, more integrated solutions, the era of flash cubes remains a nostalgic snapshot of a time when capturing memories required a physical flash of genius 4 times over. ABC's Wide World of Sports was some of the most sensational TV of its time, capturing the essence of sports in America with Evel Knievel's breathtaking stunts as a defining highlight. On February 5, 1976, viewers were glued to their screens as Knievel pulled off one of his legendary jumps, embodying the extreme of human spirit and daring. His motorcycle leaps were epic narratives of man versus the impossible, capturing the imaginations of viewers and inspiring a generation to reach for the stars, or at least jump over a bunch of cars. This show expanded the horizons of sports broadcasting, setting the stage for the future of sports entertainment. Oh, how far technology has come. Back in the day, electronic calculators were the hot tool that promised to make long division a thing of the past, though the original tool was a bit clunkier than today's sleek handheld calculators. The days of slide rules and penciled equations stretching across pages were gone. In their place stood a device that promised liberation from the numerical grind. These calculators transformed education, commerce, and daily life, making the esoteric realms of mathematics accessible to the masses. Their arrival marked a pivotal moment in the digital revolution, a leap towards a future where technology would become an extension of the human mind, forever altering our relationship with numbers. Debuting on NBC's Puppet Playhouse TV show in 1947, the Howdy Doody puppet soon after earned his own show. Howdy Doody, with his freckled face and eternal grin, was a pioneer of the airwaves, a marionette maestro who brought laughter and learning to the living rooms of post-war America. The show was a medley of entertainment and education, a place where children could gather around the television set as a community, learning the values of friendship and honesty. Howdy Doody was adored, his adventures and misadventures sparking imaginations and fostering a sense of belonging among his young audience. His legacy lives on, a testament to the power of storytelling and the enduring charm of a puppet who became a cultural icon. In the 60s, people were putting everything in Jell-O, and we do mean everything. ham, salmon, lamb, cottage cheese, fruit. The list goes on. Thankfully, that trend has faded. From savory salads suspended in lime gelatin to desserts dotted with marshmallows, Jell-O dishes were a staple of family gatherings and potlucks, a testament to an era's love affair with convenience and innovation. These creations, often colorful and occasionally confounding, captured the spirit of a time when the kitchen was a laboratory for exploring the new and the novel. The Jell-O era, marked by culinary curiosity, remains a distinct and explorative chapter in American food history. These kids' bikes were designed to look like a chopper, with the high handlebars, smaller wheels, and that classic banana seat. These bikes, emblematic of 60s and 70s childhood joy and adventure, were the vehicles of choice for explorers of suburban frontiers, the companions in quests for independence and the thrill of the ride. Riding a banana seat bike was an act of expression, a declaration of style and fun, evoking a sense of community and exploration. The legacy of these bikes rides on, a sweet reminder of a time when joy was found in the simple pleasure of a bike ride with friends under the wide open sky. Air travel has changed in so many ways, but baby boomers remember when it was common to see people smoking on airplanes. This era is a hazy memory from a time when the skies were a little less friendly to the lungs. The gradual extinguishing of smoking on flights marked a turning point in public health awareness and policy, a shift towards a clearer, cleaner flying experience. This transition mirrored a larger societal change, from acceptance to restriction of smoking in public spaces, highlighting evolving attitudes towards health and communal well-being. Today, the smoke-free cabin stands as a breath of fresh air, a testament to progress in the journey towards a healthier public sphere. Sure, the 2004 Disney movie Miracle gave younger generations a recap, but there was nothing like seeing the miracle on ice happen in real time as an adult. On February 22, 1980, the U.S. hockey team did the unthinkable by beating the then untouchable Soviet Union team in the semifinals at the 1980 Winter Olympics in Lake Placid. It was a David versus Goliath tale that transcended the rink, igniting a flame of national pride and unity in a time of uncertainty. This was a declaration, a moment of sheer euphoria that reverberated beyond sport. Clipping baseball cards to bike spokes transformed ordinary bicycles into roaring motorcycles of the imagination, a simple pleasure that encapsulated the essence of childhood ingenuity. It made the most satisfying noise when you rode down the street really fast. This pastime was a rite of passage, where the value of a card was measured not in dollars, but in decibels. The ritual of choosing which hero to sacrifice to the spokes was a testament to youthful priorities, a balance between admiration and the allure of acoustic horsepower. In this symphony of cardboard and rubber, a generation found joy, community, and the simple thrill of making their mark one ride at a time. Technically, these types of meals are still around today, but only certain people will remember when these were invented. The first Swanson brand TV dinners consisted of a Thanksgiving meal of turkey, cornbread dressing, frozen peas, and sweet potatoes. Those iconic trays of compartmentalized comfort food were the heralds of a new era in American dining, mirroring the post-war shift towards convenience and the burgeoning TV culture. The TV dinner was a cultural artifact, emblematic of changing family dynamics, the rise of consumer culture, and the quest for simplicity in the complexity of modern life. Despite nutritional critiques, TV dinners represent the evolving balance between convenience and home cooking. About 30% of milk was still delivered to homes in the 1960s. Prior to that, it was by far the most popular way for consumers to get their milk. This service, emblematic of a broader era of home delivery, fostered a sense of community and trust, turning transactions into interactions. The decline of the milkman mirrored broader shifts towards self-service and supermarket dominance, yet recent trends towards local and home-delivered goods suggest a nostalgic longing for the personal touch and convenience that the milkman represented. Before digital communication, telephone operators were key connectors, facilitating long-distance conversations through their expertise in navigating complex networks. Later generations probably have no idea that you use dial zero and then talk to a real live person to direct your call. Their role was personal, a comforting presence in the impersonal expanse of the telephone network. The transition to automated systems marked a leap forward in efficiency, but also the end of an era defined by the warmth of human interaction. The golden age of arcades was a testament to the allure of pixelated adventures and the camaraderie found in these neon-lit temples of entertainment. These spaces, buzzing with the sound of coins dropping and high scores toppling, were communal hubs where friendships were forged over joysticks and rivalries were settled on the scoreboard. Classics like Pac-Man and Donkey Kong were cultural phenomena that bridged the gap between technology and entertainment, creating a shared vocabulary for a generation. The shift from arcades to home gaming ended an era, but the comeback of retro gaming and arcade bars shows a nostalgia for arcade camaraderie. Saturday morning cartoons are not really something that people are unfamiliar with even in today's generation, but the long-held ritual has definitely become less relevant over time. A lot of this is because of streaming services and internet websites having every kind of media that a child would want to consume. Also, kids back then did not have social media or YouTube, so these cartoons really were as good as it got for many. If you had leftovers, especially pizza, from a Friday family dinner, then it was the perfect start to a weekend. One reason this became such a widespread tradition is because appointment television was very common. This was due to TV programs having specific timings and slots, like 7 a.m. for Scooby and Scrappy-Doo or 10 a.m. for Jabberjaw. Once you missed the assigned slot for these shows, you had effectively missed an episode, and there was not a way to catch up either. What are some of your favorite shows from the heyday of the 70s? When your usual dose of television was not available, you had Pet Rocks, courtesy of Gary Dahl, a collectible toy line that consisted of these rocks which were packaged in custom cardboard boxes, and they even came with little holes for ventilation. There was straw bedding that was used to imitate a pet carrier, and they became extremely popular. The Pet Rock was first released in 1975, and people would buy them as gifts or joking pranks. They made for pretty cheap gifts too, as you could get them at like $3.95 a piece at most convenience stores. After they got released, they sold 5 million in just 6 months, so it definitely got some traction in the market. As far as toys go, there were a lot more boring things to play with than stone pets you could collect. It made for a pretty humble brag too when you had all the collectibles and your friends came over. Most people's idea of a fun time was watching Star Wars when it came out in theaters. So imagine how much fun it was to be a kid going with your family, getting the largest popcorn and drink along with first-row seats. Star Wars was one of the biggest things about the entire decade of the 70s, considered now to be one of the most big-time franchises ever. When the first one came out, families and singles alike wanted to see what the hype was. A New Hope was an accurate title for the film that would spawn a series which continuously restored people's faith in the blockbuster and cinema experience. When it first came out in 1977, movies suddenly became the hottest thing once again. It also made the producers a literal mountain of gold, as the production was just $11 million, but the profit was $775 million. Kids built a box office record that still is considered one of the most historical ones ever by insisting their parents go to the theaters with them just to catch this movie. Speaking of media that defined a generation, watching The Wonderful World of Disney when it ran from 1969 to 1979 was definitely an experience that people will thoroughly remember long after our time too. The show was just that good, ranking in the top 20s regularly and being one of the most popular Disney projects to date. It was especially popular with children and captivated them as they watched with eyes glued to the screen. The story and premise of the show was very episodic, with a different story being showcased each time. Many of the fan-favorite ones were things like the Disneyland story, the True Life Adventures, and the Man in Space miniseries. Nowadays, you can just search this up on YouTube or get a file downloaded in high quality, but back then, kids would make sure to do all their chores and studying on time so they would not miss a beat of the wonderful world of Disney, and we cannot blame them. We have all heard tunes and carols during the snowy season, but Christmas caroling is largely considered a lost now, with its golden days being in the 70s. Children would rehearse for days on end in church and at home for the perfect synced-up melody that they could spread all over the neighborhoods. This was so common that the activity typically made a cameo in most films that were shot in winter, like some of the Home Alone movies. People really did always expect to see kids caroling famous Christmas songs, and hearing A Silent Night being echoed by various groups of Santa's little elves is a core memory both children who grew up during that time and adults from that era can look back on vividly. It was just that popular of a tradition, and it was pretty safe to send your child out singing with the rest of their friends throughout the neighborhood too. Maybe they would come back with some cookies, eggnog, or a nifty Christmas present, but they would always come with a big fat smile on their face. That little period of childhood when you wholeheartedly believed in visits from the Tooth Fairy was truly another world in retrospect. Sure, all of us would know the truth sooner or later, that there was never any fairy with incredibly personal transport, but only your mom and dad with what they could get you from the store. Sometimes that was a present to really solidify your belief in the generosity of the supernatural. And sometimes it made you think why a fairy would know about the latest Power Ranger action figures. Either way, waking up to a present or some money made the pain of losing your teeth for the first time something to look forward to rather than hate. Kids would always happily start thinking about what they wanted as soon as they felt a tooth shaking. And we think that is an incredible flip on the narrative. An otherwise unpleasant experience turned into a happy childhood memory, all via a lie that we just conveniently agree to keep every generation? Who says people cannot work together? Another festive occasion that always brought out droves of excited kids was the 4th of July, especially with all the fireworks, a custom we still uphold regularly. An entire generation of 70s to 80s kids have fond recollections of going to the store with their parents, picking out the perfect fireworks and setting them off as soon as the clock hit 12 and it was the 4th. With the amount of people who would fire off colorful explosions in the sky, the nighttime was a scene to behold for anyone, and a picture-perfect sight that lots of Americans would not forget even as they grew up. In fact, some of the best family moments happen when kids set off the precious fireworks they spent their entire weekend gathering and revel in the fun of the night. The 4th of July is definitely an occasion where lots of people have days they will not be forgetting. Not just children, but as a child, the fun factor is definitely 10 times more grand. You may have heard a lot about Sunday school and not know exactly what it is, but for those who do know, and even more so, for our viewers who continuously went every weekend, community potlucks were something else. It was not necessary to be a Sunday school student. If you helped out at a church as a kid or had one in your neighborhood, you would experience the joy of a community potluck. These were the closest things to communal kitchens that America ever had, and they involved a community of people sharing all their food resources and having one grand meal. The idea took off pretty fast after the Great Depression from the 30s to 50s, and by the 70s it was an established facet of American culture. In those struggling times, and even in the 70s when the economy had not entirely recovered, people thought it was much more efficient to share their resources and make big meals that could feed entire communities, as individual homes did not have enough to sustain their families more often than not. While it is a habit that has vanished from the American people by now, we would definitely like to see something this festive come back. Listening to the sound of ice cream trucks passing by was not just something you saw in cartoons and commercials. It was a way of passing the evenings and relaxing as a child that almost everyone took part in. Maybe you did not realize just how soothing this was as a kid, when you would always be in a carefree mood, but if you hear them now and your head flashes back to younger days, then you are the kind of person we are referring to. Ice cream trucks would regularly patrol neighborhoods, often taking the same routes each day, making sure they always hit up their top-selling customers. As soon as the sound would make its way into your home, an innocent excitement would bubble up immediately in your heart as you sprang out of bed, clutching the last of your allowance and blowing it all on your favorite soft-serve flavors. Ice cream trucks are not too popular now because you can get everything through Uber Eats. And ice cream bars are more of a trendy thing these days, but no one will forget the importance of the ice cream truck, a way of filling your sweet tooth cravings that pioneered the way for so many other kinds of ice cream-related goodness. Just like the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One laid claim to an entire decade of gaming and cemented themselves as the go-to consoles of the 2010s, the 70s had the Atari 2600. A lot of children will remember playing classics like Pitfall, Battlezone, Solaris, and Asteroids. In 1972, Pong came out, which gave the console a lot of hype and even sold a lot of Ataris. It was kind of like how Sony would put Bloodborne on every PlayStation 4 as a package deal, which genuinely did work in selling hundreds of thousands of consoles. That same marketing scheme worked for the Atari, but beyond convenient combos and an impressive library, the Atari 2600 was a leap in technology that allowed for all kinds of new gaming experiences, especially in the platforming genre. A lot of these were just the kind of dopamine rush that children craved in their day to recover from a sickening morning spent in school cramming fractions and the names of different animal species. They also were great to play with a friend, and some of the most popular games of our time first came out on this console, like the timeless Pac-Man. Yes, that same Pac-Man going down in a line devouring everything in sight. Today, an Atari 2600 video game or console would be a vintage item, but back then it was a must-have for most middle-class kids. At the very peak of the disco craze that overtook much of the 20th century were the 70s, a time when literally everybody was going out to the disco. It was the precursor to the raves and Coachella festivals of today. One of the ways that people found new experiences in the usual glam of the disco ball as they danced the night away was through roller discos. These were essentially skating rinks where the dancers would wear these flashy, pop-themed disco skates, and most of the music would be disco music. Historically, at least, most of the music selection would be disco-themed or in the same genre, with the occasional dance ballad or pop track put on. Some clubs would even pay rock bands like Lynyrd Skynyrd and Blue Oyster Cult, which is definitely not something you would expect to hear when going out on the town for a night of skating around in flashy lights. This was the way people partied it up in the 70s, and roller discos were popular enough that many artists even relied on them playing their latest releases for promotion. Traditionally, people would wear inline skaters, but one thing that these places were notorious for was how unique everyone's sense of style and fashion was. They resurfaced in the 2000s, but roller discos are sadly mostly a bygone trend of the past now. Today, we have gadgets like iPads and tablets to fulfill our artistic needs, but back then, coloring books was all everyone wanted. Just you, your new coloring book, and some crayons would make every kid's day. Many brands recognized how popular coloring books were becoming and started producing their own variants of the basic coloring book. Major companies like Barbie, Marvel, DC, and even sports teams created books with unshaded characters that children could bring to life with their color pencils and crayons. This was the time when gifting a coloring book to a child was considered hip, not old-fashioned. Alas, like every old trend, coloring books started to lose their cool in front of digital coloring pads and digital art tablets like the iPad, where you have any and all art utensils available to you digitally. Coloring books are still available, but rarely used by children anymore. Drive-in movies were such a big part of the culture of the 70s, and some of the most popular movies in the history of the United States of America first came out as drive-in movies. We are talking about titles like Night Drive, Drive-In, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and more. All of these are peak moments of the 70s, and each title on its own sold out theaters across the nation. But what about when you wanted to have a more comforting experience watching a movie but still wanted to go out? Sure, to scratch that kind of itch nowadays, you have things like Netflix and 123 movies, as well as every restaurant in your vicinity on your phone screen. But in the 70s, you had to go to drive-in movies to get this kind of fun. People would enjoy B-movies in massive parking lots with many others, under a romantic open sky on a big screen. However, you might be thinking that this does not really sound like something that would attract lots of kids because it sounds like a setting for young middle-aged adults. That could not be further from the truth, as kids would explicitly beg their parents to skip the cinema and go catch a drive-in movie with their favorite burger. It was a one-of-a-kind experience that we can only look back on now, as drive-in movies are largely forgotten. Neighborhood barbecues were pretty similar to potlucks in that they gave a sense of community to neighborhoods that we often do not see today. Well, who can blame us either? The real estate market is quite fast, and your neighbors move out faster. Back then, people still got to know their neighbors and threw barbecues that would have the whole block over. Kids would fight over ribs and who would get to work the grill before eventually being distracted by their parents so they could actually get started on some serious grilling. The aroma of smoked meat and the perfect ranch or dressing would cover the entire vicinity, with all of it being a scene right out of the ending of a Fast and Furious movie. It was so common in the 70s and 80s for people to really spend time with their neighbors and let their kids get to know each other too. People who grew up in the 70s might remember how they would play with their neighbors in parks or their backyard, and a big part of building that kind of relationship were these homely barbecues. The Cave of Time, The Journey Under the Sea, Space and Beyond, and your code name is Jonah. Do any of these ring some bells? They were a part of a book series known as Choose Your Own Adventure, and the entire purpose of them was to be interactive books which would let readers pick their own endings. In a way, these books walked so the role-playing genre could run. I guess Dungeons & Dragons lovers have these to thank in some way, since they popularized media with strong narratives that still allowed for personal choice to add to the fun. These were a type of book known as game books, and they were specifically aimed at children. Each of the stories were from a second person's point of view, and the reader would be the protagonist of the story. The choices they picked out of what the game book offered them were what decided the eventual ending readers would end up with. These really were the prototype for RPG games, since most video games like that today follow the same blueprint. These game books were a marvel back then and were probably the only instance where you could get a child to enthusiastically interact with a book. They have passed into American history now, but if you remember playing some of these, you know how good they were. It is time to let the curtain fall, just as it did on all of these beloved aspects of the 70s. If you had fun while watching this video, then subscribe and hit the like button. Smoking in hospital waiting rooms feels like something out of a bad movie script now, but in the 1970s it was completely real. You could walk into a hospital, sit down under a bright no smoking sign, light a cigarette, and no one would bat an eye. Nurses did it, doctors did it, patients waiting for surgery did it. Visitors lit up next to vending machines and hospital gift shops. And yes, this was a hospital, a place people went to get better. But the air in the waiting room was thick enough to slice. People genuinely believed smoking helped ease nerves, even if they were in a place surrounded by oxygen tanks and respiratory therapists. There were ashtrays on every table and smoke curling up into the fluorescent lights. If someone had a baby in the maternity wing, you celebrated with a smoke right there in the lobby. It was considered a form of hospitality. Some hospitals even had designated smoking lounges, like it was an airport. The irony is hard to ignore. Of course, as the science caught up and lawsuits started piling in, hospitals began banning indoor smoking. What seemed normal was finally recognized as dangerous, not just to the smoker but everyone around them. Nowadays, the idea of someone sparking up in a hospital sounds like a public health emergency. But back then, it was just part of the scenery. And if you think that's wild, wait until you hear what kind of errands kids were running for their parents. No identification card required. Kids buying cigarettes for their parents was so casual in the 1970s that store clerks barely even looked up. You could be 7 years old, barely tall enough to see over the counter, and still walk out with a pack of cigarettes tucked into your pocket. No ID, no questions, no raised eyebrows. All you needed was a note from your mom. And half the time, not even that. "A pack of Virginia Slims, please. My dad wants the soft pack." That was a perfectly acceptable sentence coming from a child. Some kids even took pride in knowing their parents' brand. They could identify a Marlboro from a mile away. They knew which cigarettes had menthol, which ones had filters, and which ones were cheapest. It was like a weird rite of passage. One day you're playing with building blocks, the next you're sent to the corner store to keep your dad's addiction going. Most kids did not even think it was strange. It was just one more chore on the list. Back then, cigarettes were everywhere. Commercials, restaurants, even cartoons sometimes. So the idea of kids buying them did not seem too far-fetched. But once public health started catching up and laws began to change, this practice faded fast. These days, a cashier would get fired, maybe even fined, for selling to someone underage. Back in the 1970s, it was just another Wednesday. Of course, if your parents did not feel like sending you to the store, they might just thumb it themselves. Let's talk about the golden age of hitchhiking and why it vanished so fast. Hitchhiking as a totally normal travel option was not just for free spirits or wandering poets in the 1970s. It was a legitimate mode of transportation. No car? No problem. Stick out your thumb and wait for a kind stranger to pull over. It was something teenagers, college students, and even older adults did all the time. You'd see someone standing on the side of the highway with a duffel bag, maybe a handwritten sign that said, "Headed north," and no one thought it was weird. For a while, it was even considered kind of romantic, like a symbol of trust in your fellow human, the kind of thing people wrote folk songs about. There were books, guides, and even safety tips passed around for successful hitchhiking. You learned the good spots to stand, how to look approachable, and what to do if someone creepy pulled over. Hitchhiking was not just accepted, it was encouraged in some circles. Some people even used it to get to and from work if the distance was not too crazy. But naturally, it did not stay sunshine and smiles forever. The danger was always there. It just took a while before it hit national headlines. As crime reports and horror stories started stacking up, people grew less trusting. Hitchhiking laws changed. Stranger danger campaigns launched. What was once seen as adventurous became straight-up risky. These days, sticking your thumb out on the highway is more likely to get you a side-eye than a ride. And while hitchhiking was fading into the rearview mirror, another threat was hiding in plain sight, tucked into every household's favorite household item. Let's talk about ironing board pads, specifically the kind lined with asbestos. Back in the 1970s, asbestos was the miracle material nobody questioned. It was fireproof, heatproof, durable, and completely packed into everyday items like ironing board pads. If you were ironing your Sunday best or pressing collars for school, chances are you were standing over a big square of asbestos without even knowing it. The logic back then was that if something could handle heat, it was good. And asbestos? It could handle just about anything, except your lungs. That stuff did not just stay in the pad. It crumbled, it flaked, it floated right up into the air and got breathed in over and over again. Still, no one thought twice. Moms would lean over the ironing board, kids running around, windows shut, and steam rising up like a sauna of danger. It was not until years later that we figured out those innocent little chores came with a free side of cancer risk. And speaking of leaving kids in questionable situations, sometimes they were not in the house at all. Sometimes they were left in the car, alone, with the windows rolled up. There was a time when teenagers could walk into a doctor's office, sign their name on a clipboard, and be seen. No questions asked, no ID, no copay, no adult supervising, just a quiet waiting room, a nurse calling your name, and a medical professional ready to help. Whether it was for a sprained wrist or something a little more private, kids and teens had the strange luxury of medical independence. Sometimes it was out of necessity. Parents worked long hours or had no transportation. Other times it was a rite of passage, proof you could handle things on your own. The receptionist might glance up, ask for your date of birth, and that was it. No forms, no guardian, and definitely no awkward phone calls asking for permission. It was a strange mix of trust, minimal red tape, and a time when no one worried about malpractice lawsuits over a sore throat. Of course, while you waited, you might pass the time chewing on your favorite toy, completely unaware it was painted in enough lead to make your childhood glow. Lead paint was everywhere in the 1970s. On toys, on cribs, on furniture, even on those colorful alphabet blocks you were supposed to learn from. The brighter the color, the more dangerous it probably was. Kids teethed on crib railings, gnawed on toy cars, and chewed through entire building blocks without anyone giving it a second thought. That sweet, smooth paint finish? packed with lead. And the worst part? Manufacturers knew it was toxic for decades before anyone made a real fuss. Parents assumed if something was sold in a toy store, it had to be safe. But lead was cheap, durable, and made colors pop. That made it a go-to choice for everything from baby rattles to painted toy soldiers. It was not until the damage was done, learning delays, neurological issues, and widespread recalls, that people started paying attention. Until then, those shiny red tricycles and pastel baby beds were just another part of a normal childhood. And if you think the toys were risky, wait until you hear about the do-it-yourself solution for trash. Spoiler alert, it involved fire. Home incinerators were a suburban staple in the 1970s. Back before waste management became a scheduled utility, people just burned their trash in the backyard, in a big metal drum or a stone-lined pit. If it was flammable, it went in. We are talking everything from food scraps and junk mail to broken appliances and mystery liquids from the garage. No sorting, no filters, no second thoughts. It was normal to see a steady column of gray smoke rising from someone's backyard while they stood nearby with a garden hose, just in case. The smell was unique. A pungent blend of scorched rubber, burnt plastic, and last night's leftovers. If it was trash day, it meant you were lighting something on fire. Kids helped, pets watched, and nobody called the fire department unless the flames got too high. It was messy, a little hazardous, and absolutely standard. But not everything you did for money back then was dangerous. Sometimes, all it took was a walk down the road and a few empty soda bottles. Collecting glass soda bottles was one of the earliest ways kids earned pocket money in the 1970s. You grabbed a wagon or a bike and scoured the streets for discarded bottles. Ditches, parks, parking lots. You name it. Once you had enough, you took them to the local store and cashed them in for a few coins per bottle. That money went straight into candy, gum, or maybe a trip to the arcade. It was basically the recycling hustle before recycling got trendy. Stores had shelves behind the counter stacked with sticky returns waiting to be sent back to the bottling plant. Kids knew which brands paid more and which shop owners were generous with rounding up. It was equal parts treasure hunt and side gig. And it taught a weird kind of work ethic. If you wanted that pack of baseball cards, you had to earn it, one discarded soda bottle at a time. And while kids were out making change the old-fashioned way, trouble was always a paddle swing away at school. Because back then, discipline came with a name and a handle. Back in the 1970s, a trip to the vice principal's office could mean more than just a stern lecture. It might mean a spanking, with an actual wooden paddle. And yes, some of them had names. These paddles were not hidden or secret. They were proudly displayed on the wall, hanging like trophies. The Persuader, Board of Education, or just plain Big Bertha. Discipline was physical, public, and totally legal. The school staff did not need your parents' signature or approval. They just needed a reason. Disrupt class, chew gum, forget your homework 3 days in a row? You could end up bent over a desk while the vice principal counted out swats. Some kids even got sent home with notes saying how many licks they got. And most parents, they backed it up. If you got paddled at school, there was a decent chance you would get another one at home for good measure. It was all considered part of growing up, learning respect, obedience, and how to sit down slowly the next day. The idea was simple. Fear equals discipline. Whether or not it worked is up for debate, but back then, nobody batted an eye. And when school let out, kids blew off steam in the most logical way possible, by setting off small explosives with no adult supervision. There was a time when you could walk into your local corner store, hand over a few coins, and walk out with enough fireworks to recreate a 4th of July finale. No ID check, no questions, just you, a brown paper bag, and a handful of literal M80s. These were not the tame, sparkly fountains you see today. These were small sticks of dynamite. Toss them in a mailbox, a trash can, or a patch of dry grass, and you had a front row seat to chaos. Firecrackers, bottle rockets, Roman candles, it was all fair game. Vendors sold them like candy, and kids treated them like toys. You would find some old soup can, place the firework inside, and try to launch it into orbit. Injuries were common. So were stories of someone almost losing a finger. But that just added to the excitement. The louder the boom, the better the story. No one wore safety goggles. No one read instructions. And if something misfired, you just tried again. With a little luck, a burnt eyebrow was the worst of it. Of course, if you wanted something even more volatile, you did not need to hit up a fireworks stand. You just needed a chemistry set. Chemistry sets in the 1970s were not just educational. They were dangerously fun. You could walk into a toy store and buy a box full of real, reactive ingredients: sulfur, potassium nitrate, even magnesium strips, and hydrochloric acid in tiny glass bottles. Parents assumed it was harmless learning, but what they were actually buying was the makings of a backyard bomb lab. You could create smoke bombs, stink bombs, and even small explosive reactions, all from the comfort of your garage. The instruction booklets encouraged experimentation. Want to make invisible ink? Here is a recipe. Want to cause a minor explosion? Here is how you do that too. Just mix and run. Safety warnings were practically non-existent. Protective gear? Optional. And if you did not have one of these sets, you knew a kid who did. Entire friend groups would gather around the backyard picnic table and take turns lighting fuses or stirring suspicious mixtures in old mason jars. Teachers might give a nod of approval if you mentioned it in science class, not realizing you were basically learning pyrotechnics on the side, and while the smoke cleared, your parents were already loading you into the back seat for a night at the drive-in. R rating be damned. Going to the drive-in as a kid in the 1970s was an experience, but not necessarily a wholesome one. Parents would pull the station wagon into a gravel lot, pop the trunk, and let the kids sprawl out with blankets and snacks while they enjoyed the movie up front. And the movie? Often R-rated, sometimes violently R-rated. No one enforced age restrictions. If you could see the screen and hear the speaker box, congratulations, you were part of the audience. That meant horror films, action flicks, and adult comedies with scenes that left a lot of kids wide-eyed and confused. Sometimes your parents would say, "Close your eyes for this part," but let's be real, no kid ever did. It was all part of the atmosphere. You had sticky floors, fogged-up windows, and that weird buzzing speaker hanging from the half-broken window. But it was also the only time kids and adults shared the same movie night without filters. It was a strange mix of bonding and accidental trauma. You might leave the drive-in dreaming about monsters or quoting lines you definitely should not repeat at school. But no summer adventure was complete until you found yourself somewhere you absolutely should not be, like climbing into old refrigerators at the local dump. Yes, this actually happened. In the 1970s, kids turned the town dump into a playground. And the ultimate dare? Climbing into a discarded refrigerator. Old fridges with heavy doors and metal handles were just sitting out in the open. To a kid, it looked like a secret fort or a personal spaceship. You would hop in, pull the door shut, and try to freak out your friends by pretending you had vanished. The real danger? Those doors locked from the outside. If no one let you out, you stayed in. That is not just scary, it was deadly. Public service ads started warning families about it, but by then, the stories had already circulated. Still, it did not stop kids from exploring junkyards and landfills like they were treasure troves. There was a thrill in discovering an old washing machine, a shattered television, or yes, an abandoned fridge. Scrapes, tetanus risks, maybe a raccoon surprise. It was all part of the fun. Parents usually just said, "Be careful," and left it at that. Because back then, even danger came with a little freedom. If any of this unlocked a forgotten core memory, drop it in the comments. Like the video and subscribe for more blasts from the past. No seatbelt required.